Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the Sleepy Professor channel. I'm glad to see you again. Tonight we're going on a gentle journey down the Nile River, back through thousands of years to a land of golden sands and timeless mysteries. Ancient Egypt. Just those two words can conjure up images of pyramids silhouetted against an endless sky, of quiet temples where incense once drifted through stone columns, and of a civilization that understood the value of eternity. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your breathing slow down. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just listen and let these stories from long ago carry you softly towards sleep. Let's begin our journey together. You know, when we think about ancient Egypt, we often picture it as one long, unchanging era. But here's something that might surprise you. Ancient Egypt existed for so long that Cleopatra, the famous last pharaoh, lived closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of the Great Pyramid. Think about that for a moment. The pyramids were already ancient ruins, tourist attractions really, by the time Cleopatra walked the halls of her palace in Alexandria. 3,000 years separated her from the pyramid builders. That's a span of time so vast it's almost dreamlike to consider. And speaking of pyramids, let's talk about those magnificent structures for a moment. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu, was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Imagine that. For nearly 4 millennia, nothing humanity built could match its height. It stood 481 feet tall when it was completed, its limestone casing stones polished so smooth they would gleam brilliantly white in the Egyptian sun, visible from miles away across the desert. The precision with which these pyramids were built is still remarkable, even by today's standards. The base of the Great Pyramid is level to within just 2.1 centimeters. How the ancient Egyptians achieved this without modern surveying equipment remains a testament to their ingenuity. They likely used water-filled trenches to establish a level surface, watching the still water create a perfectly horizontal plane. It's such a simple yet brilliant solution. Now you might wonder how they moved those massive stone blocks. Each block weighs about 2.5 tons on average, and the pyramid contains roughly 2.3 million of them. Recent discoveries suggest they may have wetted the sand in front of wooden sledges, which would have reduced the friction by as much as half, making it much easier to drag these enormous stones across the desert. Picture that scene. Hundreds of workers moving in rhythm, pulling these massive blocks across dampened sand, the desert sun beating down, the pyramid rising slowly, inevitably skyward. The workers who built these pyramids weren't slaves, as popular imagination might suggest. Archaeological evidence from workers' villages shows they were paid labourers, skilled craftsmen who took pride in their work. They received wages in the form of bread and beer, the staples of the ancient Egyptian diet. In fact, bread and beer were so central to Egyptian life that the hieroglyph for food combined the symbols for both. Speaking of hieroglyphs, let's drift into the beautiful world of Egyptian writing for a while. The word hieroglyph comes from Greek words meaning sacred carving, and these intricate symbols were indeed considered sacred, the words of the gods themselves. The Egyptians believed that writing had been given to them by Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, who had created it by divine inspiration. There were actually 3 types of Egyptian writing. Hieroglyphic script was used for formal inscriptions on temples and tombs. Hieratic script was a simplified, cursive form used for religious texts and everyday documents, written quickly with a reed brush on papyrus. And later, there was demotic script, an even more abbreviated form used for business and literary texts. It's rather peaceful to imagine scribes sitting in the shade, their brushes moving smoothly across papyrus scrolls, recording the stories and administration of their world. The Rosetta Stone, that famous black granite slab, was the key that finally unlocked the mystery of hieroglyphs for modern scholars. Discovered in 1799 by Napoleon's soldiers, it contained the same text written in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, demotic, and ancient Greek. Since scholars could read ancient Greek, they could finally decipher what the hieroglyphs meant. Jean-François Champollion spent years studying it, and in 1822, he finally cracked the code. Imagine his excitement, being the first person in over 1,000 years to read the words of the pharaohs. Let's talk about papyrus for a moment, that remarkable ancient paper. It was made from the papyrus plant that grew abundantly in the Nile Delta. The process was quite involved but elegant in its simplicity. The stems were cut into strips, laid side by side, then crossed with another layer at right angles. When pressed and dried, the plant's natural starches would bind the strips together into a smooth sheet. The word paper actually comes from papyrus, and some papyrus documents have survived for thousands of years, still readable, still telling their stories. The Nile River itself was the absolute lifeblood of ancient Egypt. Every year, like clockwork, it would flood, depositing rich, black silt across the farmlands. This annual flooding was so reliable and so important that the Egyptian calendar was based around it. They divided their year into 3 seasons: Akhet, the flooding season, Pare, the growing season, and Shemu, the harvest season. The flooding was so predictable that farmers could plan their entire agricultural cycle around it, year after year, generation after generation. The ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, which means black land, referring to the rich, dark soil left by the Nile's floods. The desert beyond was called Deshret, the Red Land, a barrier that protected Egypt from invaders and isolated it enough that its culture could develop its own unique character over millennia. This stark contrast between the fertile Nile Valley and the barren desert created a worldview based on duality: life and death, order and chaos, the Black Land and the Red Land. Egyptian cosmology was deeply connected to what they observed around them. The sun god Ra was perhaps their most important deity because the sun's daily journey across the sky and its nightly journey through the underworld mirrored the Egyptian understanding of life, death, and rebirth. Each dawn was seen as the sun being reborn, emerging fresh and victorious over the forces of darkness. There's something rather soothing about this cyclical view of existence, isn't there? Everything returning, everything renewing. The Egyptians believed that every person had several spiritual components. The Ka was your life force, the Ba was your personality or soul, and the Ak was the transformed spirit in the afterlife. But they also believed you had a Ib, which was your heart, the seat of emotion and thought. This made the heart incredibly important in their belief system, which is why we see such emphasis on it in their funerary practices. This brings us to mummification, that famous Egyptian practice. The process took 70 days and was quite elaborate. First, all the internal organs except the heart were removed. The brain was extracted through the nose using a long hook, a detail that might make you squirm a bit, but to the Egyptians the brain wasn't particularly important. They believed you thought with your heart. The body was then packed with natron, a type of salt, and left to dry out for 40 days. After this, it was carefully wrapped in linen bandages, with protective amulets placed between the layers. The whole process was accompanied by prayers and rituals, preparing the deceased for their journey to the afterlife. The organs that were removed weren't discarded. They were preserved separately in special jars called canopic jars, each protected by a different deity. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines each had their own jar, their own protector. These jars would be placed in the tomb with the mummy, everything needed for the afterlife carefully preserved and protected. Now, here's something that might surprise you. Not every Egyptian was mummified. The process was expensive and time-consuming, so it was primarily reserved for the wealthy and royal. Common people were usually buried in the dry desert sand, which actually preserved bodies quite well due to the arid conditions. The sand would naturally desiccate the body, creating a kind of natural mummy. It's almost as if the desert itself was participating in the preservation of these ancient lives, the famous mummy's curse that we often hear about. That's largely a modern invention, popularised after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. When Lord Carnarvon, who funded the excavation, died shortly after the tomb was opened, newspapers sensationalised it into a curse. In reality, he died from an infected mosquito bite that led to blood poisoning. Most of the people involved in discovering and excavating the tomb lived long, full lives, but the story of the curse captured imaginations then and continues to do so now, adding to the mystique of ancient Egypt. Speaking of Tutankhamun, he was actually a fairly minor pharaoh who died young, probably around 18 or 19 years old. He became one of the most famous pharaohs only because his tomb was discovered almost intact by Howard Carter in 1922. Most royal tombs had been robbed in ancient times, but Tut's tomb, hidden and forgotten, preserved its treasures for over 3,000 years. Can you imagine Carter's wonder as he peered through that small hole into the tomb, seeing wonderful things gleaming in the lamplight? The famous golden mask of Tutankhamun weighs about 11 kilograms and is made of solid gold inlaid with semi-precious stones. When you see it in person, it's breathtaking. The serene face of the young pharaoh, frozen in golden perfection, those eyes inlaid with obsidian and quartz seeming to look right through you. It's one of the most iconic images from the ancient world, and it was meant to be sealed in darkness forever, an eternal face for a king to wear in the afterlife. The Valley of the Kings, where Tutankhamun and many other pharaohs were buried, is a desolate, rocky valley on the west bank of the Nile near Luxor. The ancient Egyptians believed the west, where the sunset, was the direction of death and the afterlife. So this barren valley, dominated by a pyramid-shaped mountain peak, became the final resting place for the rulers of the new kingdom. Over 60 tombs have been discovered there, carved deep into the rock, their walls painted with scenes from the Book of the Dead and other funerary texts meant to guide the deceased through the dangers of the underworld. The Book of the Dead wasn't actually a single book, but rather a collection of spells, prayers and instructions to help the deceased navigate the afterlife. These texts were often written on papyrus and placed in the tomb, or painted directly onto the coffin or tomb walls. They included spells for protecting the heart during judgment, formulas for transforming into different animals, and incantations for ensuring the deceased would have food and drink in the afterlife. Each person's book was unique, customized based on what they could afford and what spells their family thought most important. One of the most important scenes in these funerary texts is the weighing of the heart ceremony. The deceased's heart would be placed on a scale and weighed against the feather of Maat, goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was heavier than the feather, weighed down by sin and wrongdoing, it would be devoured by Amit, a demon with the head of a crocodile, the body of a leopard, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This would mean the person ceased to exist, which was the worst fate an Egyptian could imagine. But if the heart was light and pure, balanced with the feather, the deceased could continue on to the paradise of the Field of Reeds. The Field of Reeds, or Aru, was the Egyptian version of paradise. It was imagined as an idealized version of Egypt itself, with perfect crops that grew without effort, where the deceased could live eternally in peace and contentment. It was a place of harmony and plenty, where one could enjoy all the pleasures of earthly life without any of the suffering. In some depictions, the grain in the Field of Reeds grew taller than a person, symbolizing the abundance that awaited the blessed dead. Egyptian gods were numerous and their relationships complex. There were hundreds of deities, each associated with different aspects of life and nature. Isis, the great mother goddess, was one of the most beloved. She was the sister and wife of Osiris and mother of Horus. Her worship eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean world, and temples to Isis could be found as far away as Britain and Afghanistan. Her story, particularly how she brought Osiris back to life after his murder by Set, resonated across cultures and millennia. Osiris himself was the god of the dead and resurrection, often depicted with green skin to symbolize rebirth and vegetation. According to myth, he was murdered by his jealous brother Set, who cut his body into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Isis, devoted and determined, searched until she found all the pieces and magically reassembled him, allowing him to father Horus before becoming lord of the underworld. This story of death and resurrection, of love conquering mortality, was central to Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. Horus, often depicted as a falcon or a man with a falcon's head, was associated with kingship. Every pharaoh was considered to be Horus in life and Osiris in death. This divine connection gave pharaohs their absolute authority. They weren't just rulers chosen by the gods, they were gods themselves, living bridges between the mortal world and the divine. The famous Eye of Horus symbol, also called the Wedjat Eye, was a powerful protective amulet. According to myth, Horus lost his eye in battle with Set, but it was magically restored. This eye became a symbol of healing, protection, and restoration. You'll see it everywhere in Egyptian art, often placed on amulets or painted on the sides of coffins to protect and watch over the deceased. Cats were sacred in ancient Egypt, associated with the goddess Bastet. Killing a cat, even accidentally, could be punished by death. When a beloved cat died, family members would shave their eyebrows in mourning. Cats were sometimes mummified and buried. In special cat cemeteries, and in one cemetery at Bubastis, archaeologists found hundreds of thousands of cat mummies. The Egyptians' love for cats was quite practical too. Cats protected grain stores from mice and rats, making them genuinely valuable companions. Dogs were also cherished in ancient Egypt. The dog-headed god Anubis was the god of mummification and the protector of graves. When a dog died in a household, family members would shave their entire bodies and go into deep mourning, even more elaborate than the mourning for cats. Dogs were often buried with their owners, and some were mummified with the same care as humans, showing just how much these animals were valued. The ancient Egyptians were also fascinated by crocodiles, which they both feared and revered. The crocodile god Sobek was worshipped at several temples, and at some temples live crocodiles were kept in sacred pools, adorned with gold jewellery and treated as living gods. These creatures were fed choice cuts of meat and, when they died, were mummified with full honours. It's quite something to think about, these fearsome predators being worshipped and pampered in equal measure. Hippopotamuses, on the other hand, were generally seen as dangerous and chaotic, associated with the god set. They were one of the most dangerous animals in ancient Egypt, territorial and aggressive, capable of overturning boats and killing people. Yet they also had a protective aspect. The goddess Taweret, who protected women during childbirth, was depicted as a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright. This dual nature, dangerous yet protective, perfectly encapsulated the Egyptian view of the world's complexity. Speaking of childbirth, the ancient Egyptians had quite advanced medical knowledge for their time. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1550 BCE, is one of the oldest and most complete medical texts, containing over 700 remedies for various ailments. They understood that the heart pumped blood through the body. They performed surgeries, set broken bones, and even did dental work. Some mummies have been found with dental fillings made of resin and crushed minerals. Egyptian physicians specialized in different areas, much like today. There were doctors who focused on eyes, others on stomachs, others on dentistry. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote that Egypt had specialists for every conceivable illness. This level of medical sophistication was remarkable and shows just how advanced this civilization was. Egyptian women had more rights and freedoms than women in many other ancient cultures. They could own property, initiate divorce, run businesses, and serve as witnesses in court. Some women became physicians, priestesses, and even pharaohs. Hatshepsut, one of the most successful pharaohs, ruled for about 22 years during Egypt's 18th dynasty. She's often depicted wearing the traditional false beard of a pharaoh, a ceremonial symbol of royal authority that transcended gender. Cleopatra VII, the last active pharaoh, was actually not Egyptian by ethnicity but Macedonian Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals. Despite this, she was the first of her dynasty to actually learn the Egyptian language. She was brilliant, speaking 9 languages and well-versed in mathematics, philosophy, and oratory. The popular image of her as merely a seductress doesn't do justice to her political acumen and intelligence. Makeup was important in ancient Egypt, worn by both men and women. The famous black coal eyeliner wasn't just for beauty, it helped reduce glare from the bright desert sun, and may have had antibacterial properties that protected eyes from infection. The coal was made from ground minerals like galena and malachite, mixed with oils and applied carefully with small sticks. Green eyeshadow was made from malachite, and red ochre was used for lip and cheek colour. Perfume and scented oils were highly valued in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians are credited with creating some of the world's first perfumes, using ingredients like myrrh, frankincense, and fragrant flowers. These weren't just for pleasant scents. They were used in religious ceremonies, embalming, and were believed to have healing properties. Cleopatra was said to have perfumed the sails of her ship so that their fragrance would announce her arrival before she could be seen. The ancient Egyptians loved board games. Senet was perhaps the most popular, a game of strategy played on a board of 30 squares. It wasn't just entertainment. Senet had religious significance and was believed to represent the journey of the soul through the afterlife. Game boards have been found in tombs, provided for the deceased to play in the next world. Even Tutankhamun was buried with several senet boards. Beer was the most common beverage in ancient Egypt, consumed daily by everyone from pharaohs to labourers. It was different from modern beer, thick, nutritious, and relatively low in alcohol. It was often drunk through a straw to filter out the grain particles. The brewing of beer was usually done by women, and it was sometimes used as currency to pay workers. Wine was also produced and enjoyed, though it was more expensive than beer and thus more of a luxury. Egypt had several wine-producing regions, and wines were often labelled with their vintage and origin, not unlike modern wine bottles. Some of the jars in Tutankhamun's tomb were labelled with detailed information about the wine inside, including the year, vineyard and winemaker's name. Bread came in many varieties in ancient Egypt. There were at least 15 words for different types of bread in the Egyptian language. Bread was made from emmer wheat or barley, and was sometimes sweetened with honey or dates. Due to the stone grinding process and the presence of sand in the flour, Egyptian bread was quite gritty, which led to severely worn teeth, something we can see in the study of mummies. Honey was the primary sweetener and was highly valued. Beekeeping was practiced, and honey was used in cooking, medicine, and as an offering to the gods. It was also used in cosmetics and the embalming process. The antimicrobial properties of honey would have helped preserve bodies and treat wounds, though the Egyptians understood this through experience rather than scientific theory. The ancient Egyptians had a sophisticated understanding of astronomy. Their priests studied the stars closely, and this observation led to the development of one of the first 365-day calendars. They noticed that the star Sirius would rise just before the sun right around the time of the Nile's annual flooding, so they used this astronomical event to mark the beginning of their year. This calendar was remarkably accurate, and formed the basis for the later Julian and Gregorian calendars we use today. The Egyptian year was divided into 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 extra days added at the end of the year. These 5 days were considered outside normal time, a liminal period when the veil between worlds was thin, and each day was the birthday of a major god: Osiris, Horus, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. These were days of celebration and also caution, as the normal order of things was temporarily suspended. Temples in ancient Egypt were not places where ordinary people went to worship. They were considered the literal houses of the gods, and only priests and priestesses could enter the inner sanctuaries. The general public would gather in the temple courtyards for festivals, but the innermost shrine, where the cult statue of the god resided, was accessible only to the highest-ranking priests and the pharaoh. The Temple of Karnak in Luxor is one of the largest religious buildings ever constructed. It was built and added to over a period of nearly 2,000 years, with each pharaoh adding their own sections and improvements. Walking through its vast columns, you can almost feel the weight of all those centuries, all those prayers and offerings and ceremonies conducted in the same sacred space, generation after generation. The Egyptians built their temples to align with astronomical phenomena. The Temple of Abu Simbel, carved into a mountainside by Ramesses II, was positioned so that twice a year, on what are believed to be Ramesses' birthday and coronation day, the rising sun would shine down the length of the temple and illuminate the statues in the innermost sanctuary. This precise astronomical alignment, achieved over 3,000 years ago, still works today, causing the inner chamber to glow with sunlight on those special mornings. Ramesses II, often called Ramesses the Great, ruled for 66 years and lived to be about 90 years old, an extraordinary lifespan for the ancient world. He fathered over 100 children and built more monuments than any other pharaoh. His mummy, when discovered, still had hair and was in remarkable condition. In the 1970s, his mummy was even issued an Egyptian passport so it could be flown to Paris for examination and restoration, listed as Occupation King, Deceased. The Abu Simbel temples had to be relocated in the 1960s when the Aswan High Dam was built, which would have flooded them. In an incredible feat of engineering, the entire temple complex was carefully cut into blocks and reassembled on higher ground. It took 4 years and was an international effort to save these treasures from the rising waters of Lake Nasser. The precision required to maintain the astronomical alignments during this move was extraordinary. Obelisks, those tall, pointed stone pillars, were important religious monuments in ancient Egypt. They were symbols of the sun god Ra and were usually placed in pairs at temple entrances. The pyramidion at the top was often covered in gold or electrum to catch the first rays of the morning sun. These massive single pieces of granite were quarried, transported, and erected with impressive engineering skill. Some weighed hundreds of tons and stood over 100 feet tall. The process of quarrying and moving obelisks was monumental. Workers would use wooden wedges inserted into the stone, which they would then soak with water. As the wood expanded, it would crack the stone. Then the massive obelisk would need to be transported, often hundreds of miles, and finally erected at its destination. How exactly they accomplished this raising is still debated by scholars, but it likely involved ramps, counterweights, and hundreds of workers pulling in careful coordination. Many obelisks were taken from Egypt by later conquerors, and now stand in cities around the world. There's one in Central Park in New York, one in the Place de la Concorde in Paris, and one outside the Lateran Palace in Rome. These ancient monuments, still standing proud after thousands of years, connect the modern world to ancient Egypt in a tangible way. Hieroglyphs could be written from left to right, right to left, or even top to bottom. How did readers know which direction to read? They would look at the way the figures faced. You would read toward the faces, so if the birds and animals were facing left, you read from the left toward them. It's rather elegant, this flexibility in the writing system, allowing scribes to arrange their text aesthetically on monuments and in tombs. The word pharaoh actually means great house, and originally referred to the royal palace rather than the king himself. Over time, it came to be used as a respectful way to refer to the king, much as we might say the White House when we mean the president. The pharaoh was considered divine, a living god, and the absolute ruler of Egypt. Every aspect of Egyptian life was touched by the pharaoh's divine authority. Succession in ancient Egypt wasn't always straightforward. While the throne typically passed from father to son, the royal bloodline was often maintained through the female line, which is why pharaohs sometimes married their sisters or half-sisters. This practice, while shocking to modern sensibilities, ensured the purity of the divine bloodline. However, DNA studies of royal mummies have shown that this practice, while real, may not have been as common as once thought. The colour blue had special significance in ancient Egypt, representing the heavens, water, and the primeval flood from which creation emerged. Egyptian blue, one of the first synthetic pigments ever created, was made by heating a mixture of silica sand, lime, copper, and alkali. This vibrant blue appears on countless temples, tombs, and artifacts, and its method of creation was so effective that the same chemical process is still used in some modern applications. Faience, a glazed ceramic material often in brilliant blue or green, was used to make jewellery, amulets, and small objects. It was cheaper than precious stones, but beautiful in its own right, with a luminous quality that seemed to glow. Thousands of small faience amulets have been found in tombs, tucked among the bandages of mummies, each one a prayer for protection frozen in glass-like ceramic. The scarab beetle was a powerful symbol in ancient Egypt, representing transformation and resurrection. The Egyptians observed these beetles rolling balls of dung across the ground, and saw in this behaviour a metaphor for the sun god Ra, rolling the sun across the sky. Scarab amulets were enormously popular, worn by the living for protection, and placed over the hearts of mummies to ensure the heart would not testify against its owner during the judgment of the dead. Egyptian mathematics was quite advanced. They used a decimal system and could perform complex calculations needed for building projects, land surveying after the annual floods, and calculating taxes. They understood fractions, though they primarily used unit fractions with a numerator of 1. Their geometry was practical and precise, allowing them to calculate areas, volumes, and slopes with accuracy. The Rin mathematical papyrus, dating to around 1650 BCE, is one of our best sources for understanding Egyptian mathematics. It contains 84 problems and solutions, covering topics like arithmetic, geometry, and even an approximation of pi. The papyrus begins with the promise that it contains accurate reckoning, the entrance into knowledge of all existing things, showing that the Egyptians saw mathematics as a path to understanding the world. In surveying land, especially after the Nile's floods would wash away boundary markers, Egyptian surveyors used knotted ropes as measuring tools. These rope stretchers, as they were called, could use the principles of geometry to lay out right angles and measure distances accurately. This practical mathematics helped maintain order and fairness in a society where agricultural land was the basis of all wealth. The Ankh symbol, looking like a cross with a loop at the top, meant life, and was one of the most common symbols in Egyptian art. Gods were often shown holding ankhs, offering life to the pharaoh. The symbol's exact origin is unclear. It might represent a sandal strap, a magical knot, or perhaps a more abstract concept. Whatever its origin, it became the perfect hieroglyph for the word life, simple yet profound. Egyptian art had very specific rules and conventions that remained remarkably consistent for thousands of years. The human figure was depicted with the head in profile, the eye drawn from a frontal view, shoulders shown frontally, and legs in profile. This wasn't because Egyptian artists couldn't draw more realistically. It was because this style showed each body part from its most characteristic angle, creating an ideal, eternal image suitable for the afterlife. Important people in Egyptian art were drawn larger than less important people, regardless of their actual size. This hierarchical proportion meant the pharaoh would always be the largest figure, gods might be even larger, and servants and workers would be depicted quite small. It was a way of showing importance and status through visual means, making the social and divine hierarchy immediately clear. The Amarna period, during the reign of Akhenaten, saw a dramatic change in Egyptian art. The formal, idealized style gave way to a more naturalistic, sometimes almost exaggerated style. Akhenaten himself was shown with an elongated face, prominent belly and wide hips, very different from the athletic ideal of other pharaohs. Whether this reflected actual physical characteristics or was a deliberate artistic choice emphasizing his uniqueness remains debated. Akhenaten attempted to revolutionize Egyptian religion by promoting the worship of Aten, the sun disk, above all other gods. He essentially tried to create a monotheistic religion in Egypt, closing temples to other gods and moving the capital to a new city, Akhetaten, built to honor Aten. This religious revolution didn't outlast his reign. His successors, including Tutankhamun, returned to the traditional gods, and Akhenaten's city was abandoned to the desert sands. The beautiful bust of Nefertiti, Akhenaten's principal wife, is one of the most copied works of ancient art. Found in the workshop of a sculptor in Akhetaten, it shows extraordinary artistry and captures an idealized yet somehow personal beauty. One of her eyes is missing its inlay, and some scholars think the bust may have been a model used to teach other sculptors, a three-dimensional reference kept in the workshop for copying. Egyptian jewellery was exquisite and elaborate. Goldsmiths could work gold to incredible thinness and combine it with semi-precious stones like carnelian, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and feldspar. They mastered techniques like granulation, where tiny gold beads were fused to a surface to create patterns. The jewellery found in royal tombs shows craftsmanship that would impress even modern jewellers. Lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone, was particularly prized and had to be imported from Afghanistan thousands of miles away. This shows the extent of trade networks in the ancient world. Turquoise came from the Sinai Peninsula, where dangerous mining expeditions were mounted. These precious materials, sourced from the edges of the known world, were worth the considerable effort to obtain them. Egyptian furniture could be quite sophisticated. Chairs, beds, headrests, chests, and tables have been found in tombs. Some pieces show incredible craftsmanship, with inlaid designs, carved decorations, and elegant proportions. Tutankhamun's tomb contains several beautifully crafted chairs, including a child-sized throne showing him and his wife in an intimate, tender scene, covered in gold and inlaid with glass and stone. Headrests, rather than soft pillows, were used for sleeping. These were curved pieces of wood, stone, or ivory that supported the neck while keeping the head elevated and cool in the hot climate. They also protected elaborate hairstyles or wigs. While they might seem uncomfortable to us, the Egyptians used them for thousands of years, and many were decorated beautifully, transforming a functional object into art. Wigs were commonly worn by both men and women. Egyptian wigs were made from human hair or wool, often quite elaborate with complex braiding and styling. They served practical purposes. They protected the head from the sun, kept it cool by allowing air to circulate beneath the wig, and they kept lice and other parasites away from the scalp, as most Egyptians kept their natural hair cut very short or shaved entirely. Egyptian clothing was generally simple, made of linen woven from flax. The hot climate meant that less clothing was often better. Men often wore simple kilts, women wore straight dresses, often with pleated details. The wealthy would have very fine, almost transparent linen that was light and cooling. White was the most common colour, as it reflected heat, though clothing could be pleated, fringed, or decorated in various ways. Pleating was an art form in itself. The finest linen could be pleated into tiny, precise folds that would have required enormous skill to create and maintain. Some of the pleated linen found in tombs still shows these delicate folds after thousands of years, a testament to both the skill of ancient launderers and the dry preservation conditions of Egyptian tombs. Laundry in ancient Egypt was hard work. Clothes were beaten against stones, trodden underfoot in water, and rinsed in the Nile or in canals. Fuller's earth, a type of clay, was used as a cleaning agent. Despite the challenges, Egyptians valued cleanliness and fresh clothing. Priests were required to wear only freshly laundered linen and to bathe several times a day. The Egyptians practiced circumcision, which for them was a rite of passage into adulthood for boys. This practice is depicted in tomb art and mentioned in medical papyri. It was likely done around puberty and marked the transition from childhood to manhood, when a boy could take on adult responsibilities. Egyptian dentistry, while not as advanced as their other medical practices, did exist. Dental problems were common due to the gritty bread that wore down teeth and the honey-heavy diet that caused cavities. Some mummies show evidence of dental abscesses that must have caused terrible pain. Evidence of drilled teeth and gold wire used to stabilize loose teeth has been found, showing that dentists did attempt to treat dental problems. The average height of ancient Egyptians was less than that of modern people due to nutritional and health factors. Men averaged about 5 feet 6 inches tall, and women about 5 feet 2 inches. Pharaohs, with their better nutrition, were often taller than average. Ramesses II, for instance, was unusually tall at around 5 feet 9 inches. Life expectancy in ancient Egypt was relatively short by modern standards. Many people died young from disease, accident, or complications from childbirth. Those who survived childhood might expect to live into their 30s or 40s. Living to old age, like Ramesses II did, was quite rare and seen as a sign of divine favour. Yet despite shorter lifespans, the Egyptians' focus on the afterlife meant they were always thinking about eternity. Their great works, the pyramids, temples, tombs, were built to last forever, and in a way they have succeeded. These monuments still stand, still telling their stories, thousands of years after their creators have gone. The Egyptian concept of Ma'at, representing truth, balance, justice, and cosmic order, was central to their worldview. Ma'at wasn't just an abstract concept, it was a goddess, and it was the responsibility of the pharaoh to maintain Ma'at in the world. When Ma'at was maintained, the Nile flooded on time, crops grew, and society functioned harmoniously. Chaos and disorder were the opposite of Ma'at, threats to be constantly guarded against. Egyptian society was hierarchical but not entirely rigid. While moving from peasant to noble was difficult, it was possible through service to the pharaoh, skill in a particular craft, or through the priesthood. Scribes, who could read and write, held respected positions, as literacy was rare and valuable. Being a scribe meant secure employment and social respect. Children in ancient Egypt played with toys much like children today. Archaeologists have found wooden dolls, balls, tops, board games, and toy animals. Some toys had moving parts, wooden crocodiles with movable jaws, or toy mice with tails that moved. It's rather touching to think of Egyptian children thousands of years ago playing with toys that wouldn't seem entirely unfamiliar to children now. Egyptian children went naked until puberty, simply because of the heat. As they grew older, they would begin wearing simple tunics or kilts. Noble children received education, learning, reading, writing, mathematics, and literature if they were to become scribes or take on administrative roles. Most children would learn their parents' trade or craft, apprenticing and learning through practical experience. Marriage in ancient Egypt was remarkably informal compared to many other ancient cultures. There were no formal ceremonies or legal documents required. A couple would simply begin living together, and this was recognized as marriage. Divorce was equally straightforward and could be initiated by either party. The informal nature of these arrangements doesn't mean they were taken lightly. Family was central to Egyptian life, and most marriages appear to have been stable and loving partnerships. Love poetry has survived from ancient Egypt, and it's surprisingly romantic and emotional. These poems speak of longing, desire, joy, and heartbreak in ways that feel very human and relatable even now. One poem describes the beloved's voice as being sweeter than honey, another speaks of the physical symptoms of lovesickness. These ancient voices expressing timeless emotions remind us that human feelings haven't changed much across the millennia. The Egyptians celebrated numerous festivals throughout the year, many tied to agricultural cycles or religious occasions. The Opet festival, celebrated in Thebes, involved a grand procession where the statue of Amun would be carried from Karnak Temple to Luxor Temple, accompanied by music, dancing, and celebration. These festivals were times when ordinary people could participate more directly in religious life, when the boundaries between sacred and secular blurred in joyful celebration. Music was important in ancient Egypt, used in religious ceremonies, entertainment, and even in work to maintain rhythm. Instruments included harps, lutes, flutes, drums, and sistrums, a type of rattle sacred to the goddess Hathor. Musicians were often depicted in tomb paintings, and some achieved considerable status. Music was believed to please the gods and could be part of magical rituals meant to heal or protect. Dance was also valued, both as entertainment and as religious expression. Temple dancers performed during festivals, and professional dancers would entertain at banquets. Tomb paintings show dancers in energetic poses, their movements frozen in paint but suggesting rhythm and grace. Some dances were acrobatic, with dancers performing backbends and other impressive feats. Egyptian banquets, at least among the wealthy, were elaborate affairs. Guests would sit on chairs or cushions served by servants who brought platters of food, roasted meats, bread, fruits, vegetables, and plenty of beer and wine. Entertainment might include musicians, dancers, and acrobats. Cone-shaped objects shown on the heads of banquet guests in tomb paintings were once thought to be decorative, but they may have been cones of perfumed fat that would slowly melt, releasing fragrance throughout the evening. The lotus flower held special significance in Egyptian culture. Blue and white lotus flowers grew in the Nile, and their daily cycle of opening at dawn and closing at dusk connected them to the sun and to rebirth. Lotus motifs appear everywhere in Egyptian art, from temple columns carved to resemble lotus stems to delicate lotus-shaped cups and bowls. The lotus was offered to the gods, and the scent of lotus perfume was highly prized. Gardens were cherished by wealthy Egyptians, providing not just beauty but also shade and a cool refuge from the heat. Garden pools stocked with fish and waterfowl, trees offering fruit and shade, flower beds filled with lotus, poppies, and cornflowers. These gardens were carefully maintained oases. Tomb paintings often show the deceased enjoying their garden in the afterlife, suggesting these spaces represented an ideal of peaceful contentment. Trees were relatively rare in Egypt and thus precious. Date palms, sycamore figs, and tamarisks were cultivated and valued. The sycamore fig was associated with the goddess Hathor and was believed to stand at the boundary between this world and the next. Tomb paintings sometimes show the deceased receiving food and water from a tree goddess, a beautiful image of nature providing eternal sustenance. Egyptian astronomy influenced their architecture and religion profoundly. The heliacal rising of Sirius, its first appearance in the dawn sky after a period of being invisible, coincided with the Nile flood and marked the Egyptian New Year. The Egyptians tracked other celestial events as well, noting the movements of planets and stars. The ceiling of the tomb of Seti I is painted with an astronomical ceiling showing constellations and decans, stars used to tell time at night. The concept of the Bay, that aspect of the soul that could travel between the worlds of the living and the dead, was often depicted as a human-headed bird. This bee would need to return to the body each night, which is one reason why preserving the body through mummification was so important. Without the body, the Bay would have nowhere to return to, and the person's existence would be threatened. The elaborate tombs of the wealthy were designed as eternal homes, complete with everything needed for the afterlife. Furniture, clothing, food, tools, weapons, jewellery, games, cosmetics, all were placed in the tomb. Servant statues called shabtis or ushabtis were included, magical figures that would come to life in the afterlife to perform any labour required of the deceased. Some tombs contained hundreds of these shabti figures, ensuring the deceased would never have to perform manual labour in eternity. The texts inscribed on tomb walls and coffins weren't just decorative. They were believed to have magical power, to actually help create and ensure the afterlife they described. Words had power, and writing them down made them real in a profound way. This is why we see such care taken in the carving and painting of these texts, each hieroglyph perfectly formed, each spell complete and correct. The Egyptian concept of the afterlife evolved over time. In the Old Kingdom, the afterlife was primarily the domain of pharaohs. By the Middle Kingdom, these beliefs had democratized somewhat, and non-royal people could aspire to their own afterlife. The spells that had once been carved in royal pyramids became available to anyone who could afford to have them written on their coffin, or on papyrus scrolls buried with them. The shadow, or shut in Egyptian, was considered another important spiritual element. Your shadow was part of you, and in the afterlife, your shadow needed protection, just as your other spiritual aspects did. There are spells in funerary texts specifically to protect the shadow, showing how thoroughly the Egyptians thought through every aspect of existence and death. The Egyptian language itself has a long and fascinating history. Old Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian, Demotic, and finally Coptic. The language evolved continuously over thousands of years. Coptic, the last stage of the Egyptian language, is still used today in the liturgy of the Coptic Orthodox Church, a living connection to ancient Egypt maintained in prayer and worship. Ancient Egyptian literature included not just religious texts, but also stories, teachings, and poetry. The tale of Sinuhe, dating to the Middle Kingdom, tells of an official who flees Egypt, lives abroad, but longs to return home and be buried in Egypt. It's a sophisticated narrative exploring themes of exile, identity, and the pull of home. Reading it, you realize the Egyptians were master storytellers, understanding narrative structure, character development, and emotional resonance. Wisdom texts, collections of advice and moral teachings were popular. The Instructions of Ptah-hotep, dating to the Old Kingdom, offers guidance on how to live well and succeed in Egyptian society. Much of the advice would seem familiar. Today, be honest, respect your elders, don't be arrogant, treat people fairly. The fundamental values of Egyptian society preserved in these instructions show a culture that valued order, respect, and ethical behavior. The Egyptian military was well organized and effective, protecting Egypt's borders and sometimes expanding them through conquest. Soldiers were equipped with weapons made of bronze and later iron, spears, swords, bows and arrows, and shields. War chariots, introduced in the Second Intermediate Period, revolutionized Egyptian warfare, providing speed and mobility on the battlefield. The Battle of Kadesh, fought between Rameses II and the Hittites around 1274 BCE, was one of the largest chariot battles in history, with thousands of chariots involved. Rameses portrayed it as a great Egyptian victory in temple reliefs, though historical evidence suggests it was more of a stalemate that eventually led to one of the world's first peace treaties. This treaty between Egypt and the Hittites was inscribed on temple walls and on clay tablets, establishing borders and mutual defense agreements. Egyptian fortresses protected the borders, particularly along the Nubian frontier to the south. These massive mud brick structures, with thick walls and strategic positioning, controlled trade routes and defended against invasion. Excavations of these fortresses have revealed how thoroughly the Egyptians planned their military architecture, with sophisticated designs that maximized defensive capabilities. Trade was vital to Egypt's prosperity. Egypt exported grain, papyrus, linen, and gold, while importing cedar wood from Lebanon, ivory and exotic animals from Africa, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and olive oil and wine from the Mediterranean world. Trade expeditions were major undertakings, requiring organization, diplomatic relations, and often military protection. The Egyptians undertook trading expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt, located somewhere along the Red Sea coast, perhaps in modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. These expeditions brought back incense trees, myrrh, ebony, ivory, and exotic animals. The expedition of Queen Hatshepsut to Punt is famously depicted on the walls of her mortuary temple, showing ships loaded with treasures and even myrrh trees being carefully transported with their roots in baskets. Ships were important to the Egyptians, who used the Nile as their primary highway. Riverboats were typically made of bundles of papyrus reeds bound together, while seagoing vessels were made of wood, often cedar imported from Lebanon since Egypt had few large trees suitable for shipbuilding. These ships, propelled by oars and square sails, could carry heavy cargo and navigate both the Nile and the Mediterranean Sea. The Suez Canal in modern times connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, but the Egyptians actually had a canal linking these waters in ancient times. This canal, which connected the Nile to the Red Sea, was dug and redug several times over Egypt's history, facilitating trade with the Red Sea region and beyond. It fell into disuse and was forgotten long before the modern canal was built. Mining and quarrying were important industries. Egypt had rich mineral resources, gold mines in the desert, copper mines in Sinai, and excellent stone quarries. Quarrying expeditions to obtain granite from Aswan, limestone from Tura, or grey wacke from Wadi Hammamat were organised like military campaigns, with hundreds of workers sent into the harsh desert under the protection of soldiers. The unfinished obelisk still lies in the Aswan quarries, cracked and abandoned after workers discovered the flaw. It would have been the largest obelisk ever erected, weighing over 1,000 tons. Seeing it there, partially cut from the bedrock, gives us insight into ancient quarrying techniques. Workers would pound the granite with balls of dolerite, a harder stone slowly and patiently separating the obelisk from the surrounding rock. Egyptian glassmaking was a sophisticated craft. While glass had been made in Mesopotamia earlier, the Egyptians developed their own techniques for creating colourful glass beads, small vessels and inlays. Glassmaking required high temperatures and skill in working with molten material, and the vivid colours achieved. Deep blues, reds and greens show the artistry involved. Metallurgy in Egypt began with copper and gold, both of which could be worked relatively easily. Later, bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, became important for tools and weapons. Iron came late to Egypt, and even when it did arrive, it was initially treated as a precious metal, more valuable than gold. The famous dagger found in Tutankhamun's tomb, made from meteoric iron, shows how rare and special iron was in that period. The concept of the Djed pillar, often associated with Osiris's backbone, represented stability and endurance. During the Sed festival, a ritual celebration of the pharaoh's continued reign, the raising of the Djed pillar was an important ceremony, symbolising the pharaoh's renewed strength and the stability of the kingdom. These symbolic acts, these ritual performances, weren't empty gestures. They were understood as necessary to maintain cosmic and social order. Amulets of all types were worn by both the living and the dead. Each amulet had its own purpose and power. The Tayet, or Isis knot, protected women and invoked the goddess's protection. The Djed pillar provided stability. The SA symbol offered protection. The Hedjet and Deshret crowns, representing Upper and Lower Egypt, symbolised royal authority. These small objects, worn against the skin or placed carefully among burial wrappings, were prayers made physical, protection made portable. Egyptian magic, or Heka, was a legitimate force in the universe, used by gods and humans alike. Spells and magical practices were part of everyday life, used for protection, healing and ensuring success in endeavours. Magicians were respected professionals, and their knowledge of spells and rituals was valuable. The line between magic, religion and medicine was blurred. All were different approaches to understanding and influencing the world. Curses were feared in ancient Egypt. Tombs sometimes bore curse inscriptions warning thieves of terrible fates if they disturbed the burial. While these curses were meant to deter robbery, they also reflect the belief that words had power, that properly spoken or written, they could cause real harm. Of course, most tombs were robbed anyway, suggesting that greed often overcame fear. Egyptian dream interpretation was practiced, and there are surviving dream books that list dreams and their meanings. Some interpretations seem quite logical. Seeing yourself drinking wine meant a happy outcome, while seeing a large cat meant a large harvest was coming. Dreams were believed to be messages from the gods or insights into the future, and priests specialised in interpreting these nightly visions. The concept of the soul's judgment after death meant that ethics and behaviour in life mattered. You couldn't simply make offerings or perform rituals to ensure a good afterlife if you had lived wickedly. Your heart, which contained the record of your deeds, would reveal the truth when weighed in the balance. This added a moral dimension to life. What you did mattered, not just what you believed or what rituals you performed. The negative confession, recited by the deceased during judgment, was a list of sins the person claimed not to have committed. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not told lies. I have not been angry without cause. I have not stirred up strife. Going through this list of moral principles gives us insight into what the Egyptians valued: honesty, peace, justice, respect for life and property. The Egyptian view of the universe was that it emerged from Nun, the primeval waters of chaos. From these waters, the first land emerged, and on this land, creation began. Different creation myths emphasize different gods. In one version, Atum created himself, and then created other gods through thought and speech. In another, Ptah created through thought and word. These myths weren't contradictory to the Egyptians, they were different ways of understanding the same profound mystery of existence. The cosmic principle of Isfet represented chaos and disorder, everything that threatened Maat. Isfet was always present, always threatening to overwhelm the ordered world. This is why maintaining Maat was such a constant concern. Order and civilization were achievements that required continuous effort and vigilance, not natural states that could be taken for granted. The Egyptians believed in demons and malevolent spirits that could cause illness, nightmares, and other troubles. Protective amulets, spells, and rituals could ward off these dangers. Houses might have protective spells, inscribed near doorways. Children wore amulets to protect them from harm. This wasn't paranoia. It was a worldview where the boundary between the seen and unseen worlds was permeable, where spiritual forces were real and needed to be respected and managed. Water from the Nile was considered sacred and life-giving. Rituals of purification using Nile water were common. The Nile itself was sometimes deified as Hapi, the god of the annual flood. Hapi was depicted as a well-fed man with a rounded belly and large breasts, representing abundance and fertility. Hymns to Hapi praised the god for bringing prosperity and life to Egypt. The desert, while feared as a place of chaos and danger, was also spiritually significant. Desert caves and valleys served as places for hermits and those seeking visions in later periods. Even in pharaonic times, the desert was the realm of Set and other dangerous deities, but it was also where gold and precious stones could be found, where mysteries resided. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE, became one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, though it was Greek rather than traditionally Egyptian in culture. The famous Library of Alexandria, the lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. These were achievements of the Ptolemaic period. Yet Alexandria also represented something of an ending, the transformation of Egypt into a Hellenistic kingdom, moving away from its pharaonic past. The Rosetta Stone, that key to unlocking hieroglyphs, was actually a rather boring administrative decree about tax exemptions for priests. Its significance lies not in what it says, but in the fact that it says the same thing in 3 different scripts, providing the key that allowed modern scholars to finally read ancient Egyptian writing again, after it had been lost for over a millennium. When the last temple to the old gods closed in the 6th century CE, when the last person who could read hieroglyphs died, ancient Egypt truly ended. For over 1,000 years afterward, the great temples and tombs stood silent, their meanings lost, their hieroglyphs unreadable. The Egypt of the pharaohs became a mystery, its monuments admired but not understood. It wasn't until Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798, which included scholars and scientists alongside soldiers, that Europe began to seriously study ancient Egypt. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone during this expedition would eventually lead to Champollion's decipherment, and suddenly the silent monuments began to speak again. The voices of the ancient Egyptians, silent for so long, could be heard once more. Today, Egyptology continues to reveal new discoveries. New tombs are found, new interpretations of text proposed, new technologies applied to age-old questions, ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis, satellite imagery. Modern science is giving us new insights into this ancient civilization, and yet, despite all we know, ancient Egypt retains its mystery, its ability to fascinate and inspire wonder. The pyramids still stand, weathered but enduring, testament to human ambition and skill. The temples, though partially ruined, still show traces of their ancient glory, their columns still reaching toward the sky. The treasures in museums around the world, the golden masks, the painted coffins, the delicate jewellery, all speak of a people who believed in beauty, in eternity, in creating things that would last. When you visit Egypt today, you can still feel the presence of this ancient world. You can stand in the shadow of the pyramids, walk through temple courtyards where priests once performed their rituals, sail on the Nile just as the ancient Egyptians did. The connection to the past is tangible, real, a gift that spans millennia. The ancient Egyptians built for eternity, and in many ways they succeeded. Their monuments remain. Their art still moves us. Their stories still fascinate us. They achieved a kind of immortality, not in the afterlife they believed in, but in our memories, our imaginations, our continued fascination with their remarkable civilization. Perhaps that's the final lesson we can take from ancient Egypt, that what we create, what we build, what we leave behind can outlast us by thousands of years. That human creativity and human achievement can echo through time, speaking to people who live in worlds unimaginably different from our own, yet who can still appreciate beauty, skill, and the fundamental human desire to create something meaningful. As the ancient Egyptian scribe might have written at the end of a text, it is finished, from beginning to end, as it was found in writing. Our journey through these 100 facts has reached its end, gentle and complete. And now, my friend, we've truly wandered together through these 100 quiet facts about ancient Egypt. This civilization that understood that the present moment is always connected to both past and future, that believed in cycles and renewal, in death and rebirth, in the eternal return of all things. As you drift towards sleep now, perhaps you can imagine the Nile flowing, as it has for millions of years, slow and patient, carrying its life-giving waters through the desert. Picture the pyramids standing silent under the stars just as they've stood for thousands of years, monuments to human aspiration and the desire for something beyond the temporary, something eternal. Think of the scribes in their quiet rooms, brushes moving steadily across papyrus, recording the daily life of a civilization. Think of the farmers watching the Nile rise each year, trusting in the rhythm they had known all their lives. Think of the artists painting tomb walls, their work meant to be sealed in darkness yet executed with perfect care, because quality mattered more than being seen. The ancient Egyptians understood something profound about time. They built their world around cycles, the daily journey of the sun, the annual flood of the Nile, the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. There was comfort in this cyclical view, a sense that endings were also beginnings, that loss contained within it the seed of renewal. In their art, their architecture, their beliefs, they sought to capture eternity, not to stop time, but to exist in harmony with it, to create things that would endure, to ensure that memory and meaning would persist. And here we are, thousands of years later, still thinking about them, still marveling at what they created, still finding meaning in their stories. That's perhaps the most remarkable thing of all, that a civilization that ended so long ago can still speak to us, can still inspire wonder, can still offer us insights into what it means to be human. The Egyptians believed in eternal life, and though not in the way they imagined, they have achieved it through the monuments they left behind and the fascination they continue to inspire. Let yourself float on these images. Golden sands, quiet temples, the steady rhythm of the Nile, the peaceful faces of ancient statues gazing into forever. There's no rush, nowhere to be, just gentle darkness, quiet thoughts, and the soft pull of sleep. Rest well, my friend. The ancient world will still be there in your dreams, patient and eternal, waiting to share more stories another night. Good night.